Теперь давайте поприветствуем нашего французского докладчика Бенуа Шесно. Он очень долго ждал своего момента выступления. Benoit, are you ready?
Mostly, I guess, yeah.
Okay.
It works.
Take this. Take.
Okay. Okay.
Пожалуйста.
Yes. Okay. I'm excited to be there. Thanks to welcoming here. Today I will talk about what Python can learn from Erlang. To just quickly introduce myself, I'm doing a lot of things either in Python or either in Erlang. In Python, I'm mostly known for JUnicorn and other tools in CouchDB world and stuff like this. And in Erlang, I'm also coding a lot of things. I am a core developer of CouchDB. I've forked CouchDB in Arcouch. I've wrote Acne, which is a pure HTTP Erlang client, which is able to handle 2 million of connections, concurrent connections at the same time, and other stuff like this. And I'm doing open source for a living. So I will try to not troll too much, but still, I will just start with that. When we are speaking about Python, we generally consider that Python is an object language, but Python is not really an object language. If we see the definition of Alan Key that I'll let you read, object programming is about passing message between small objects that keep a state and that keep protection to the state, etc. So in Python, we have objects, but we don't pass any. Yeah, okay. That false contact. We are not passing message because we don't have to pass message. We have only one thread, and even async won't on that. We have only one thread on which we try to put in one context the most of thing we can, which is the point of async. So object programming is about passing message between states, and your object can be on one core, can be on one CPU, wherever you want on your machine, or on different machines. And this is what Alan Key, the creator of the object concepts, which is not so far from the actor algorithm after all, was speaking about the objects. So I won't talk about making another scheduler in Python. I already did that. If you look at my repository, there is Offset, which was trying to put the scheduler of Go in Python. It works quite well, but we were still limited to the GIL, and to scale, we were thinking about launching multiprocess. My talk is about reliability, because you can have the faster process. You can have your process. You can have your process asynchronous. You can launch multiple connections. You can handle concurrent connection to your application, accept concurrent connections from the server, from the clients, etc. You can be very, very performant, but it doesn't mean nothing if you're performant for a minute and you reboot your machine. Go back. Your performance for 2 minutes, you reboot a machine. You lost everything, and you as a developer, you'll be very happy. You have a very efficient algorithm, but your application is not reliable. It crashes. So it doesn't have to be used after all. Your application needs to be first reliable. What is a reliable program? A reliable program should be resistant to the failure. And what I mean by resistant to the failure, this is not trying to catch any error that you have. You will fail. You can have the better abstraction in try-catch. You can have a lot of unit tests. Believe me, it won't be enough. Your application will crash. What we mean by resistant to the failure, it's being able to, when you restart, when your program go back from the crash, you will be able to continue your activity. Just like if you are going to withdraw some cash at the bank, at a cash machine, if the cash machine crash, You don't want to have your money took twice from your account. You want that the bank being able to handle that. And this is what we call to be resistant to the failure. So we want to be able to recover easily from the failure, which means that if your program crashes, you have to know it very fast, and you want being able to restart it and take the last state where your application was. And we also want, because sometimes we make errors, or sometimes we make improvements, but we don't want to stop the activity of our server. We don't want to say to our customer, hello, we are closing for the two next day because we are upgrading all our server or all our applications. A lot of company already actually does that. But we don't want to do that. We want to be able to upgrade our codes very easily without stopping the service. And this is what we call a reliable program. Sorry. Okay. So, in fact, the problem is how I'm staying alive, how my program can stay alive the most possible time possible. And in Erlang, this is done by process isolations. I will talk about that. Everything in Erlang is about process. In fact, Erlang is a very object programming language for a functional language. We are launching process with our small thread, light thread, just like Greenlet, except that we are able to launch that on multiple core or multiple CPU or machine. And everything is isolated in a process. And a process is able to keep properties for you and is able to protect the properties between processes. This is an object, according to Allen Key. This is about pattern matching, because instead of trying to try-catch everything, we will try to match the results that is coming back from a function. So if you match a result that is coming back from a function, you will be able, rather than trying accepting, you will be able to just say, okay, I'm accepting this pattern, but this pattern is not okay, and your application will crash. And everything in Erlang is done, so so you accept the crash. The crash is natural, and you want to crash very fast, so you will be able to being reliable again very fast and to re-keep the state. This is about we are doing that in Erlang also by message passing. So instead of trying to have global variable, or instead trying to have a GIL, and the GIL is what is the GIL is about? The GIL is about having a way to say I have my variable that I'm upgrading. I'm updating my variable from a thread, or I'm updating my variable somewhere in my context, in my yield context, in my generator context. My variable is keep safe and make sure that my variable will be updated. And the GIL is about to stop all the Python VM and update the state of the variable. And this is done for other things. In Erlang, we are doing that by message passing. We don't stop anything. We pass message from one process to the another. From one object to the another, we are copying data. So each process are isolated, but we are sharing immutable data. And we will see how to do that in Python. We don't share any memory. So in short, process isolation is about that. So you have 4 processes. Okay, you have 4 processes. One crash. Erlang will make sure that your system will continue to operate. So each process continue to exchange data. The fact that one process crash may have raised an error, and it may be supervised by a supervisor. So if a supervisor in Erlang detects an error, it will restart the process. And in the meantime, the system continues to operate. It didn't stop. You have a crash, but it continues to work. This is what we call isolations. In Python, we can't do that, and in most languages, in fact, we can't do that. We may do that in Smalltalk. We may do that in Lisp with some stuff. But we can't do that in most languages. And this slide, I was about, generally when I'm speaking about let it crash in Erlang, I'm putting this slide first, because in Erlang we already solved that. And in Python world, or in Go world, or etc., we are solving that by using the system to supervise the process. So if a process crash, we call a supervisor to restart it, which can be supervisor D or system D or any supervisors. Nothing new on that. And if something crashes, we also operate on multiple machines. Where in Erlang, if a process crashes, no problem. I'm just restart a process where I have another process that is working. It won't impact the other process. In other words, we try to load balance our infrastructure. So if a machine crash or if a Python VM crash, I will have another machine that will take the relay. And this is done by load balancer or proxy or whatever. And where in Erlang everything can be isolated from the VM, from the process, etc. In Python world or in other world, we launch containers using Docker, LXC, or any other methods, or any other possible methods. But all these methods doesn't solve one thing. So if you can restart your process with supervisor, you can load balance with the supervisor, but if your program crash, you lost the state, except if you stored it in your database. In Erlang, if a process crash, if you want to upgrade your program, you just look at the memory and upgrade the state of your application if you need to, or just reuse the last state. You can't do that very easily with a supervisor. When your process crash, you lost everything. When your machine crash, you lost everything, except if you store it in the database. And believe me, and you know it probably, this is very hard to store in the right time the state of your application before it crash, or to log the state. This is where Erlang is good, and it can be done in Python, and this is what we will see. Process isolation is hard in Python for these 6 points. So everything runs in one thread. And because everything running is one thread, when your thread crash, it's done. If your main thread crash and you have a multi-concurrent routing in a sync queue, it will crash. If you have something in your generator beyond the EL from or beyond the sync task in a sync queue that crash, everything will crash and we lose the state. So the method and all these slides are mostly a summary of where I came when I built Genicore. In Python and in other language, even in Go, we are trying to solve that by handling the concurrency issues and the problem with OS processes. So rather than having one process, we are using the main thread to arbiter multi-process on which we pass the data workers. And each worker handles the task. So if a worker crash, this is no problem. We have other workers running on different CPUs. This is also a good method if you want to use a multi-process or all the CPUs you have on your machine, rather than having your poor main thread in Python using only one core, or blocking other threads on the system with a kill. In Python, you have different methods. You have PyParallel that mostly work only on Windows today, but since January, it started to work on Unix. It allows you to span multi-threads in an unblocking way and use all the core in your machine and launch different tasks in parallel or concurrently on different core. You have PyPySTM, and I will come back on that later. So Let It Crash is about failing fast. It's about because if you fail fast, you are able to recover very fast. If you don't fail fast, if you try catch in the loop, so you have, I don't know if you already saw this Python program that have a lot of try-catch embedded in each one in another. And you can see that the developer tried to catch every case possible, but not this one. And because he tried to catch this one, the error will come very late in your stacks. And because it comes very late, then you may have a multiple customer waiting because he tried to catch everything, every task, calculating, asking to the database, hey, something was wrong, is my state okay, etc., etc. Where when you crash early, then you can just say, go to my last step, because I know where I crashed. I just crashed there, and I just took the last crash. Don't cache too much. We will see later about that. And crash in a way to recover fast. Don't crash so your machine crash. Try to crash smartly try to crash when you are logged the error or when you have stored the last state of your application and crash. Just store the last state of your application and crash. To do that, we may need to do some gesticulation in Python, where immutability is the rules in Erlang's world on some other language. This is not the rules in Python. What is immutability? It means that if I say r equal 1, it will be always r equal 1. I won't update a. I will update b. I will create b with the value of a on which I will increment or whatever operation I do. It means that when I pass a value to an expression and give me the value can be used in place of the expression, like a function in mathematics. If you say fa equal ax plus 1, then the value of fa will be always the value that you have with the expressions. Why immutability? Because this is easier to think about it. It's easier to say my variable won't move, won't mutate. It will be always the same value. After all, this is what you are doing when you are debugging a program. When you are launching your debugger, you are keeping the note about all state of your variable. Wouldn't it be quite easier to just say my variable don't mute? It is always the same. So if I crash here, I know that my variable has this variable. I don't have to look at the debugger. I have already the state of my variable. Because it's easy to share between processes or whatever. I don't, if my value move, for example, if I'm launching two processes on the same machine, and I'm trying to pass the value of A to the other process, there are good chances if you mutate the value of A on the first process, that the second process won't have the right value of your value of the first process. Where if you don't mute, if it doesn't mute, you make sure that your variable will be the same on each process. Or you can copy it on another machine. It will be always the same variable. And it's thread safe. Because the variable you don't mute, you can pass it to a thread. You don't have to log it. Your variable has always the same value. You pass it to the thread, and if a mutation happens, it will happen on another value on the thread. And then you pass the value on the new value on the other thread. You never log that way. And yes, the real world is mutable, that's true. But at some time, it's not mutable. This is what we are trying when we have this in physics. You can go at the bottom. At some point, the value doesn't mute anymore. You have many mutations at the same time, but at some point, it doesn't mute. It doesn't mute. For example, in Git world, in Git you can have multiple revision of your file, but these revisions are immutable. They doesn't mute anymore. You have a one revision on which you put in reference on that. And how to do that in Python? So, for example, I have a person objects that is maintaining an identity. This person object can change. Obviously, my occupation can change over the year, or my age is changing over the year, of course. So I'm creating an instance of this person's. If I would keep the same instance in memory and move it over the times, dev1, I wouldn't know that dev1 has changed. I would always have the latest state of my variable. And if I want to share it at some point, there are good chances that two people doesn't know the age of the developer one. Just a real example. Put someone that has his birthday on some time zone, and you call it from another time zone. You don't know that he has his birthday because the variable mute. But if you have a reference, if you say developers, dev1 is a person, well, whatever. So I'm able to say here, I'm keeping a reference to the person. The person object can change, but the name, the identity of the person object won't change anymore. So my identity doesn't mute, but the value can mute behind that. The revision can mute. Of course, this is not enough because you probably already get that things. So I have my dictionary that I'm updating at some point in a thread or in another process. I'm updating my dictionary, and another thread is trying to read the dictionary, all the items for the dictionary. At some points, you have one developer in the dictionary that is updated, and you will have an exception from your Python. Python will raise an exception saying the value changed, and you can't have the different value. So maybe here we want an immutable dictionary. So when you start to look at the dictionary, you are only looking at the snapshot of the dictionary, and you are looking at the dictionary at a static dictionary at the time you want to see it. So you have only the latest version of your developer, only the latest value of the developer. It doesn't move. So you may be late because of the update, but at the moment you are looking at it, this is the value you are reading that. Just like in a database. When you are reading the value in a Postgres, you want to make sure that someone can continue to write while you're reading the value. And so this is done by using MVCC techniques, which is mostly being able to keep multi-versions of the value of your data, which means that you are able to read, you are reading the last state that has been stored, and someone is able to write at the same moments. And the next time you are reading it, you will be able to get the last value. And you can do that in Python if you have an immutable dictionary. And you can find some static data structure. It would be better to have them in Python, but you can find them in function module or Python's module or function py modules. You have a lot of immutable data structure that you can use in Python. Of course, there is a reason for the GIL. The GIL is here to simplify the life of the developer. Thinking about mutable value can be painful sometimes. Sometimes you really want to update A, or you will have a lot of new variable created because you want to update this value with this cosinus, sinus, or any other functions. And with a functional language, this is not a problem. We create a function, pass another function, and you have where if you are doing that in Erlang, you will have a lot of lines with your new variable updated from the old or from the other variable for nothing. In Python, the good thing is when you update A from your threads, you make sure that A will be the same in your main thread at the cost of the GIL, because everything was logged during this operation. It wasn't atomic. This is why PyPy-STM enter in the game. So PyPy-STM is a transactional memory systems, which means that, like in a database, when you update a variable, it's putting literally a transaction in the systems. And by doing this transaction, he's saying, I'm upgrading automatically this variable while someone, another thread, or another core is updating this variable at some points. So you will have the same as a immutable data structure at this point, but it will be hidden due to the transaction system. Just like you are doing a transaction in a bank. When you are doing a transaction in a bank, at some point you are able to see, I have 10,000 euro, and if you ask to someone to read at some moment, you also see you also see the 10,000 euro, but at the same moment you are doing the operation, you continue to see the same amount of euros where you did the operation. Next time you're redoing the operation, he's reading the amount of euros and he will see the operation. This is what PyPy-STM is doing that. And he's doing atomic change, and he's doing that the threads become real thread on the system, and you say hello to the GIL. The last point to fix right after that is the I/O system, but it will be easy. Since your thread is not blocking anymore, you can use the same trick as Asyncio is using. So Asyncio, to unblock I/O, is launching threads that handle for you the I/O before coming back to the scheduler of the Asyncio system, to the event loop, and calling the generator, passing the data to the generator. So you will get it with the Yale from. But even asyncio is locked by the GIL. Even when using asyncio, you will have the GIL working. So you may have handled in parallel the I/O. It may have been done in a thread, and the threads are really OS threads, so handled in parallel on the system. It can be on any core. But every time you are calling back the value from the thread, you are locking all the main threads, all the other operation in Python, and this is what the GIL is about. If you are using PyPy STM, you will unblock everything because your threads will be really parallel, and everything will happen concurrently also, really concurrently. You won't have the GIL blocking there. And finally, don't be too catchy. Yeah, this is why I already said, try to fail fast. Do not cache everything in your code, rather try to fail. And if you have an issue, sometimes it's better that rather than trying to call another API to check a status or trying to call a database or whatever, it's maybe just better to log your error and re-raise. Because if you design your application smartly, you will have make sure that when your process restart, when your application restart, it will anyway read in the database or read on the API, and in any case get the last state. So don't try to do that in an exception. Just crash. Optionally log it, but crash. Re-raise the exceptions. This is why we have the re-raise functions in Python 3 or something equivalent in Python 2. And sometimes it would be better in Python if we can do the same things than in Erlang, the pattern matching, which I was saying before. Pattern matching, so for example, I have a function that is connecting a socket. And if it's okay, I will always get the tuple okay socket. And if it's not good, I will get an error. So maybe I want to match both OK socket or error. If I want to retry, for example, I may want to catch error and go in the loop, or maybe not. I could just crash and just waiting for OK socket. And if something wrong, if I get a bad argument, if I get a bad clause, I don't get OK socket, then the process will just crash. And maybe you retry by the supervisor. The supervisor will launch a process that will redo the connections. And yeah, it allows also other stuff. You can reserve multiple types of multiple patterns and do different actions. In Python, you have the patterns library that allows you to do pattern matching in Python. So this is just simple. You decorate your function, and your function is able to accept anything right after. And then you test behind that. So if you want to go further, you can look at the patterns library. And yeah, if you see this example in Erlang, the resave ends, this is mostly saying I'm receiving a message that say message, and I pass it to the pass the message to the say functions. Quit I pass to the quit function, and in other case I throw an error. But you can also do that in Python. So I can imagine to have an action objects and a send message objects and a log objects. All are inherited from the action objects. And when I send a message, rather than trying to send the message right now, I'm passing it to the send message function, which will be logged in an actions in a variable actions, and else I log the error, which will be logged in the actions. And I delayed the executions, because if I delayed the executions, if something happened, I'm also saying if I'm crashing, I didn't do any executions. I just handled that before. I delayed the execution and handled the error before the execution is done. And then I have a run function that is doing in a loop every time that iterating the action and do the action in the order they have been done. And you can do that with asyncio. And that's all. Finish. Thank you.
Thank you, Benoit. Merci. And this is a small present from our company to you.
Thank you.
You're welcome. You're in the good company. And, sorry.
If you have any question.
Да, простите, ребят, вопросы есть? Да, поднимаем руки. Отлично, давай.
You've been talking about keeping the state of the application after it crashed. But in most of the time, if you have some complex database with some complex relationships, essentially you have to poll, you have to restore the ORM.
Yeah.
So what's the point then to keep the state of an application? Because you have application and database. They are usually separate.
The ORM is a kind of state, in fact. Most Python on the ORM using objects. So your object is a state there. The fact that you are loading it from the
Near to me.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. The fact that you are unlinking from a database or from the file system doesn't change anything. The thing I want to say is where some people try. You have a state, but the thing is, you want to make sure that you didn't execute some things. You want to make sure that you have an history of the operation you done, so you can eventually roll back or make sure at least, or to delay your actions. You want to make sure that when you are inserting your database, it will be inserted, or because if it is inserted twice, for example, you will have twice the information in your database. So when you went back from the database, it will crash. Your application logic will be wrong. Sorry. So with an ORM, when you crash, you want to make sure that all the operation will be discarded and that you will be able to restore correctly. This is what I'm calling the application state. Let's see. I'm not sure I'm clear. Yeah.
Okay. And restoring the program state is very painful in Python, but very useful, really. It's a long way, and when you're restoring the state, you can save all your computations or hard computations that you made. It's true?
Mostly. So you have your ORM that is getting the data from the database. That's fine. And if your application crash and there is no impact from your database, then you get the new state. But some people try to do more. They try to, like I say, ORM is your state in your case. This is your application state. So you just want to make sure to restore at a clean state. This is what I'm trying to say. And if your application crash, don't try to insert the most of thing. Make sure that all the operations are discarded and that when you come back, you are able to either redo or either take the new operations because your clients will retry or stuff like it. Depends on the logic of your application. But just sure to crash with a clean state. Yeah. Essentially what?
Oh, I think I understood you.
Okay.
Отличненько. Еще вопросы? Ребят, ну серьезно. Ну если надо будет перевести, я переведу, постараюсь, помогу кое-как. Отлично. Включен, все нормально работает. Говори.
Thank you for your great talk. On last PyCon, Guido van Rossum talked about proposal for type hinting and possibilities for statical code analyzers.
Yeah.
In Erlang ecosystem has a tool called Dialyzer for that purpose. Please tell me about your opinion about static code analysis in Python and in Erlang? Thanks.
Well, yeah, this is a different purpose from the, yeah, you're speaking about the PEP 484, the PEP accepted 5 days ago. So yeah, so in Python this num dialyzer, and you have this new PEP in. The main purpose of the static typing in that case is mostly to be able to launch tests before your application runs, and try to launch like in Erlang World we have proper tool, or not remember the name of the private one. So you will be able to launch tests depending on the type of your function, or your program. Program will be able to analyze your code and say this function can't code this one because it doesn't give the right type. It's quite different from let it crash, etc. This is a pre-analyze. It won't solve you from crash. It will help you to make your code better or find some refactoring, which is good, and we are using it every day in Erlang, at least for those who specification is their codes. But it won't help you. At the end, you want a system that is able to help you to recover your state, your application state, very fast, to handle the failure.
Отличненько. Есть еще вопросы? Ответили на вопрос, да? Отлично.
If you follow the let it crash way, why we need the hot restore feature?
So I will take the example of Genicorn, because in Genicorn you are able to upgrade your application without stopping the service. In Genicorn, this is done by, because we are launching multi-worker, multi-processes that handle the application logics, and when you want to upgrade your application, you are sending a graceful upgrade to Genicorn, a signal that is handling graceful upgrade, and Genicorn will launch new worker with new code and say to the old worker, stop accepting connections. But the application that is running in your workers will be still able to work. And you will finish the transaction for your customers and kill, or tell to the client, say, you need to stop, I'm upgraded.
And we can achieve this using load balancer or any other techniques.
But you will lose the state, except if you stored in database. Yeah, you have something in memory. You have application running. For example, I have all my users handled by a registry, and I'm upgrading the registry code. Obviously, I don't want to say to the cache, delete everything and restart. Or it can be done with load balancing by sharing a cache stream application.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Я видел, там был вопрос в том углу.
Thank you for your talk. The question about, I guess, performance impact of keeping the state of the program or saving it between the crashes. And is there any memory footprint or CPU consumptions, anything? Does it impact somehow? And if you add it to Python, for instance, will it slow me down twice?
Yeah, well, actually, this is the cost is very low because machines are not so much expensive, except if you are in the cloud. Yeah, you have an impact because you are keeping something in memory, or you are keeping all the worker, and before you have an impact either on the CPU or on the memory, or even on the file system if you temporarily store your state on the file system. But compared to the cost of losing your state and trying to bootstrap, I have this example of a telecom application, which is time it crash. It needs to synchronize all the database using Mnesia in Erlang World, and you have all this bandwidth use, and the cost is enormous. And sometimes all the system crash because you can't assume so much memory, so much usage of the bandwidth. Where if you were keeping the state locally on each machine, or having a way to keep the state without being able to resynchronize everything from the world, then you're better. The cost is less expensive in that way.
Thank you. О, отлично. Появляется все больше и больше вопросов. Так. Все работает? Говорите.
Hi, thank you. I have a question about hot redeploy. How often do you use it?
How often do I use it?
Let's use it in prod, because from my experience, when I use it, not in Python but in Java world, it was only for development, because it is extremely difficult to convert data that is already in memory to the new code base, to match the updated code, to read configuration files if they are changed. So I wasn't able to use it in my own experience. Have you used it?
It depends.
What difficulties have you met? Some recommendations, maybe?
Yeah,
Thank you.
for all the application I do, this is mostly why I forked at first CouchDB. It was about having the possibility to do auto upgrade on that. And in Erlang world, this is quite more easy than doing that in Python, because in Erlang world you have a way to launch new process and to mark them as old, to keep your state, and you have some system call that you can call that will be able to handle the states. And if you want to roll back, you can also do that in Erlang world. In the GNUcon world, there are a lot of people actually that are using the auto upgrade functions, and also big company that are doing that. Because this is, if you do the HTTP right, you don't have any state in your applications. Your state is somewhere else. And restarting a worker, it will just keep a new state for your customer, for your new customer. And while the old customer will finish the job and go out, it may arise some problem when you have WebSocket. But this is about to say to the WebSocket to pass a new state to the client, saying you need to close and reopen, some stuff like it. But yeah, it's used in the real world, and I'm using it in production in big websites, yeah, services.
Еще вопрос?
Essentially, you're saying that to get the most power from keeping the state, you need to have your application needs to be its storage. You must not have external storage, because in most of the situations you have to resynchronize the state of the application with the state of external storage.
It totally depends on the size of the state. Obviously, if you want to cache all the username, for example, for a push over application, for a push application or whatever, you won't do that. You will store that in Redis. So either you keep your state locally, or either you keep your application isolated. So because it's isolated, if you launch a new process with your new code, it will be able to keep the new state or the old state with a new feature, while your old application will finish. This is why the process isolation is also very important in that. Because if you don't share any state between your application process, then you will be able to say, I can kill this one, or launch a new process with a new code. That's more easy like this.